Hello, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's fourth space. Thank you for joining us for today's event, Multi-Disciplinary Approaches to Artificial Intelligence and Sustainability. And this is brought to you by the Applied AI Institute, the Program on Leadership in Environmental and Digital Innovation for Sustainability, also known as LEADS, and Sustainability in the Digital Age. And just to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube live from fourth space. We are also located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. For Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge, co-creating daily activities that examine research questions and projects happening across the university. And we're running today's event as a live stream Zoom meeting. So those of you joining us there, if you have any comments or questions, pop those into the chat and we will do our best to read those out later. And same for you here in the space. If you have any comments or questions, just raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone over to you. Okay, with that, it's now my pleasure to hand it over to Knowledge Mobilization Manager, Sustainability in the Digital Age and Future Earth Canada Hub, Andrea Ventimiglia. Andrea, great to have you.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you to my panelists for being here. So like Doug said, this is going to be a discussion on multiple perspectives to AI and sustainability. Presented by the Applied AI Institute. So thank you to Lindsay who helped us organize this, by the LEADS program. So this is a program by Dr. Damon Matthews, and it includes all the universities here in Quebec, and it's a graduate training program on leadership for digital environmental sustainability. And by my organization, Future Earth, which is a global research organization, sustainability research all around the world, and here in Canada, we focus on sustainability in the digital age. So before we start, I just wanted to kind of draw your attention to this photo here. So this is actually chosen by Lindsay. Thank you, Lindsay. And you might recognize the painting. It's fairly well known, and the painting is called The Ascent of Mont Blanc, painted in 1855 by John McGregor, but it's been sort of retaken by an artist, a digital artist called Hannah Baccarat. And I'm just going to read from Hannah, from the artist, what she says about this painting. So, reappropriating the intention of this painting, the collage overlays images of wires and circuits that are melting the ice, an ironic commentary on progress in the name of environmental extraction. This work positions AI as a system built on labor, material, and capital, revealing the often invisible labor in electronics manufacturing throughout the global majority. Just sitting with that for a minute. And I'd like to introduce our speakers. Here we have Mélissande. Mélissande Tang is a PhD student at the Université de Montréal, MILA. She's working on applications of machine learning for biodiversity conservation and to tackle climate change. And she'll talk to us today about her work on AI for biodiversity monitoring from the perspective of an AI researcher collaborating with ecologists and ecology. Beside Mélissande, we have Alex. Alex Hernandez Garcia is an assistant professor at the Université de Montréal and at MILA. His current work focuses on machine learning research methods that can facilitate scientific discoveries to tackle the climate crisis and health challenges. And he'll discuss the importance of assessing the environmental impact of artificial intelligence. Thanks so much. Beside him, we have Ceyda. Ceyda Yolgormez is a postdoctoral researcher at the Concordia Indigenous Futures Research Cluster, working in the Abundant Intelligences Research Program. She'll introduce Abundant Intelligences to us and consider how Indigenous epistemologies can inform sustainable AI development. And then we have Martin. Martin Deron is a research advisor at Université de Montréal, a PhD student at Concordia, and the coordinator for the Center for Interdisciplinary Research on Time, Technology, and Capitalism, CIRTTC. He'll speak on the role of AI and digital technologies in the transition to a post-growth society. Okay, so before we get into it, I would like to ask my panelists to play a little game. Got a piece of paper in front of you and a pen. Really simple. We're going to do a word association. One word. What word comes to your mind when I say sustainability? Yeah, full page. Play along at home. All right, we're ready? Want to go ahead and hold them up? Martin?
I have shift.
Shift from Martin. Synchrony from Ceyda. Health from Alex. And holistic from Melisande. Great. Here's the definition that we often use from the UN Brundtland Commission. So meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So that's one definition, and I think it encompasses a lot of what we just saw here. And again, you might be thinking of the Sustainable Development Goals. You know, this is a useful framework for some people. It has a series of 17 goals that thinks about everything from poverty, health, climate, water, to gender equity and clean energy. So that's one. And we'll do it again. Take another paper or take on the back. What comes to your mind when I say the word artificial intelligence? Ready? Melisande, overused. Alex, hype. Ceyda, failed?
Promise.
Promise.
I almost wrote pipe, but I have extraction.
Extraction. Okay, I can see where we're going here. Here's a definition from the recent EU Artificial Intelligence Act. AI system means a machine-based system that is designed to operate with varying levels of autonomy and that may exhibit adaptiveness after deployment, and that infers from the input it receives how to generate outputs, such as predictions, content, recommendations, or decisions that can influence physical or virtual environment. And so there might be things missing from that definition. And we'll think about that as we continue our discussion. Okay, so we're going to start. Each panelist is going to present their work at this nexus of AI and sustainability. And I think just because we have the slides, I'm going to start with you, Melisande. Is that okay? Go ahead.
So hi, I'm Melisande. As Andrea said, I'm a PhD student in computer science at Université de Montréal. And my work focuses on applications of AI and remote sensing for biodiversity monitoring. So one question that I'm really interested in is how do we fill the gaps in biodiversity data? So in order to inform conservation policy, it's very important to understand the current state of biodiversity. But if you look at where data is sampled, so those, for example, are observations of bird records that were collected. And so it's very biased towards Europe and North America. But even in places where it seems like it's very well sampled, so around, well, actually the arrow is kind of wrong, it's around Massachusetts. Well, you can see that it's, if you zoom into it, like most of the observations are taken in places that are close to roads or where people live, or in national parks that people visit a lot. But oftentimes places that are most biodiverse are the places where there is less disturbance. So what I'm interested in is trying to help ecologists build better species distribution models so that we can fill those gaps in biodiversity data. And so one thing that I've worked on is predicting bird species distributions from satellite imagery and environmental data in order to produce those kinds of dense maps that you see in the bottom for multiple species at once. Another question that I've been exploring was in collaboration with a biologist from Université de Montréal, Etienne Laliberté, who works a lot on how to monitor trees from drone imagery. So if we look at the context in Quebec, so Canada has this program, which is, planting 2 billion trees, but we all know that nature-based solutions can be very flawed in the way that we track those efforts. So typically in plantations, what people do is every 10 years, they visit the plantation, sample a little plot and see, how much carbon is stored there. But obviously, they sample maybe 5% of the plantation and then extrapolate and then say, okay, we remove 30% of the carbon that we estimate there because some trees might have died. This is, of course, not very efficient. So what we're trying to do here is have better monitoring of those plantations through the use of drone imagery, which can be collected very efficiently. And yeah, I think I'll stop there and pass it along to the next person.
Thanks. Yep. We can go in order. Sure. Go ahead, Alex.
All right. Yeah, so my name is Alex Hernandez Garcia. I'm originally from Madrid, Spain, and I've been in Montreal for a few years, and I have recently started working as an assistant professor at the Université de Montréal, and I'm also at MILA, like Melisande. Yeah, my work is on machine learning research for science, if I am to summarize it in a couple of words. But yeah, you might wonder, like, okay, what science? And in general, I try to use my machine learning research for scientific applications that can have an impact or potential impact on climate change, on tackling climate change or sustainability in a broader sense, or also health, which for me are things that are very much interconnected. So in more detail, that means projects, for example, that can leverage machine learning research for discovering new materials that can tackle some of the challenges in the industry. When we look at, for example, carbon emissions from the industry, well, in general, from the world, we see that a lot of them come from industrial processes that involve, for example, electrochemical reactions that use materials that are very inefficient. And there is, of course, many things to do to tackle this problem. One is using less energy. Another way is replacing these materials that are very inefficient with new electrocatalysts, in this case, that can use less energy, that are less energy demanding. So that's, for example, one avenue. And that's an example. There's a need for new materials in other areas that can have an impact in reducing carbon emissions, for example, or for carbon capture, etc. So there's a bunch of applications, and machine learning can be used in this case because it helps us explore the very, very vast kind of space of potential conceivable materials in that case. So that's one area where I work. Another area is, for example, drug discovery, in particular antibiotics discovery, kind of for the same reasons. There's a huge space of potential candidate drugs, molecules that could be used as antibiotics. And this is an area, for example, that the industry pretty much ignores because it's not profitable for them. And typically the research is focused on a small subset of candidate drugs that are already well known by the industry, and then there's a big gap there because they don't work. We haven't discovered any antibiotics in decades. So for the same reason, machine learning can be used in this case for exploring a much larger space of candidates of potential drugs and potentially in a few years discover new antibiotics. And yeah, also work on climate modeling using machine learning, etc. And some of you might have noticed that I say machine learning instead of artificial intelligence. I might use artificial intelligence too, but it's not that I'm a big fan of AI. Won't get into the details now. Happy to chat. But yeah, when I say machine learning, generally meaning what Andreas has defined before in the slide.
Thanks, Alex. Wonderful.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. I also don't agree with the AI thing. So yeah, sharing the sentiment. So yeah, hi everyone. Thank you, Andrea, for convening us. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what abundant intelligences is. This is a research program that I'm part of. And then I'm going to also link it a bit towards the sustainable AI development. What can be the links there? So Abundant Intelligences is a research network. It's a research program that brings together indigenous knowledge systems and AI. We're an international, indigenous-led, indigenous majority research program tackling the AI question coming from indigenous epistemologies, indigenous ways of knowing. We work with about 50 co-investigators spread across US, Canada, New Zealand, Hawaii, and we bring together diverse disciplines like AI, neuroscience, indigenous thought and philosophy, law, sociology. I am a sociologist, as well as artists, knowledge holders, language keepers, cultural revitalization organizations. So we try to bring together not only like academic disciplines in the way we understand, but we're trying to bring maybe multidisciplinarity on a deeper level, trying to include the community into the process, into the conversation around how can we design better AI. And we start from a question of not ethics. Obviously, AI ethics is still very hip, I think. But we feel like the ethics conversation can only be secondary to the epistemological problems that underlie the AI space. So we're really trying to enter into a more fundamental science-based conversation around how does an AI know? How do AI researchers know? What does the data know? Trying to engage those questions really. And we try to engender practices that challenge the extractive ways in which the models are being built currently in the dominant kind of framework paradigm of production, and center AI is more like more a relational and community-driven practice. And that kind of a bit ties into how this kind of vision of indigenous AI or abundance of intelligences can inform sustainability, or that aligns AI development with sustainability. And the two things that really came to my mind thinking about this is, first of all, the land-based knowing, and the other is the protocols embedded in the technology production. But first, thinking about land-based learning and knowing, yeah, really, the indigenous epistemologies have a real deep gauge in thinking about a knowledge really tied to a land, right? Or also relations tied to a land. There is a real material, well, what we call in current academic parlance, materiality. There is a really a vision for materiality within these indigenous epistemologies that really understand these technologies as already embedded, already cultured, already coming from lands and waters. And you know, these models don't fall out from space, obviously, even though we're given all these visions of brain in a vat type of understanding, or this cloud computing type of stuff. But they're very much real, they're very much material, produced by rare earth minerals, mined out of the depths of the earth. Or data centers need so much water. So there is this kind of deep connection that AI has to the environment and to the earth, that indigenous epistemologies already take for granted, that kind of relationality. So there is a kind of the big connection there for sustainability, I think. And another thing that kind of comes from this is also the need to work with small data and small models. Obviously, AI questions so much about data, and indigenous languages right now is getting a lot of attention. UNESCO declared Indigenous Languages Decade, and there's a lot of language models that are built for indigenous languages, and that's been kind of, I don't want to say low-hanging fruit, but there is a real rush amongst the big players to capture a lot of like indigenous language data. But the problem over there is a lot of these languages do not have the big data that you would have in English or in other kind of Western languages. So can we build really robust, rigorous models out of very small amounts of data? So this kind of comes up as a research question that also points us towards maybe more sustainable AI practices. Maybe we don't need big data to create good models. I think I'll actually stop there. I was going to go into protocols, but I'll do that later because I'm talking too much. I'll get back to it.
Thank you, Ceyda. Martin, I think has some slides.
Yeah, I have two, but maybe I'll try to skip through some of it because you all have been super succinct. Great. So yeah, I had just a first slide about how I approach this question of this intersection of AI and sustainability, sort of as like a context. Obviously, starting from the recognition that there are many current uses of machine learning for sustainability-oriented efforts, and there are many more potentially to come. Whether that's I added a few that sort of like come a lot in the literature on like different examples and different articles, but we could definitely add obviously biodiversity monitoring, scientific discovery, and the examples that we'll maybe get to hear more from today. However, as it's been mentioned, when we take a step back and look at the ICT as a sector as a whole, with digital technology, which includes AI and all the different techniques, what we come to realize, as it's been discussed, that despite the heavy marketing of dematerialization, we're obviously far from that. That in order to exist, all of these AI systems need an important and significant infrastructure that is itself very material, and that comes with a lot of negative direct effects on the environment. GHG emissions, energy consumption, resource depletion. We're talking about minerals, but also water and diverse pollutions. I'm not sure pollution is the word, but diverse types of pollution. Sorry. There's always that question about whether AI is a net positive or net negative. You know, what it can contribute to, when it can contribute to, versus what it costs in terms of environmental harm. From recent literature, it seems that the net environmental gains are mostly hypothetical so far, so it's still a bit of a gamble. However, the harms are increasingly being documented. And you know, beyond the direct effects, there's also a lot of indirect effects, such as the rebound effect and the systemic effects. We can talk about that maybe later a bit more. But the way I look at this intersection in my research is to sort of like leave that idea of neutrality that is so present in the field of computing and look at AI systems being developed within a broader socio-technical system, and recognizing that a lot, especially the bigger models, obviously, that require a lot of investments, are all oriented towards this growth-oriented system. So they tend to benefit the dominant economic activities that focus on privatization, wealth concentration, power concentration, etc. And did I have other notes? Yeah, so the frameworks that we have access to that seem like they're tackling those issues in the form of sustainable development, responsible AI, they usually mean sort of like keeping on going with that trend of still being very growth oriented and trying to make it a bit less bad, a bit less biased, a bit more responsible, but it never leads to really to reconsideration of the place of digital technology as a whole in society. It doesn't really reconsider the business models, the power dynamics, which I believe at least, or I argue, are at the root of the unsustainable trajectories that we are on. Yeah, so in my research, I'm a first year PhD candidate, so it's still very broad, obviously, and hopefully I'll try to refine this over the next few years. But it's an interdisciplinary research between environmental sustainability, science and technology studies, transition studies, and ecological economics, done through the INDI program here at Concordia. And I'm trying to shift the usual sort of framing that we have currently in this space, which usually asks, how can we steer the AI transition towards planetary boundaries or towards the SDGs, towards sustainability? And instead, I'd like to explore what role does technology play in a sustainable future? So not just thinking about like greening, optimizing the current system or degrow the current ICT, but more exploring speculative sustainable futures and then asking the question of what does technology look like in this space? So the questions I'm interested in, once again, very broad, but mostly what type of technosphere, what type of digital layer would be possible from a material perspective in a society that is aligned with planetary boundaries when we take into account projected access to limited resources, with the fact that we will have to deal with more severe consequences of climate change and all that. Then once we sort of are able to estimate how much tech can we have in this future, what form could technology take in this context? So I believe that a lot of different alternative forms of technology could emerge. So can we think about like the devices that we will use, the type of uses in terms of access, in terms of economic models, and under what deployment parameters? And then thinking back in like more of a transition study perspective, what current domains or uses could remain relevant in that projected speculative future or even gain importance. And in contrast, what current domains or uses may be incompatible with this anticipation of context in terms of access to resource, dealing with climate consequences and all that, and which means thinking about the redirection or the dismantling of those activities, which is not a conversation that we often have even within sustainability transition efforts.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Okay. So we're going to go back around, but I would kind of encourage you to respond to each of the points raised by your fellow panelists. And I'm going to start with Mélisande. Honestly, I was going to ask you, tell us what you've learned about using AI as a tool for social good. But something that Ceyda said is actually more interesting to me. And she said, we can create robust models perhaps with smaller amounts of data. And I'm wondering, like in the drone images that you're using, is that possible? Have you seen that? Do you want to kind of pick up on that a little bit?
Yeah, I actually wanted to respond to that, so it's perfect. So one thing I've been exploring in this study on plantations is how, so there are a lot of what are called like foundational models that are coming out from very big tech companies, usually, sometimes like academic labs, but that's a bit more rare. And those models are kind of publicized as things that can solve everything at once. And they have been, kind of trained to do so. And I think a lot of like ecologists, if they were going into, okay, let's try to apply like AI so I don't need to do my field campaigns like everywhere in the world, would kind of resort to those models. But when you try to apply them on real data, it never works as expected. And it never works like out of the box. So there's always a need to adapt them if you want to use them. And so I think there's a stream of research that is about, trying to make use of those models that have already been developed and that have been trained on like tons and tons of data. But what I found in my case is that actually training a very like regular, smaller custom model and like my tiny bit of data actually works better than trying to adapt like a huge model that was not trained like for identifying trees. And so that makes me reflect on, how I think it's a bit of a shame that we have like so many different large entities trying to develop those, foundational models. And then we end up with like 5 or 10 different variations on it for things that, are supposed to solve everything. And then that's the metric that we use to evaluate them. When in fact, when you have like practitioners who have their own data with their own specificities, none of those would actually work out of the box. So I think there's a lot of space for, uses of AI that are really just taking existing, older, smaller architectures and applying them on a specific problem, and it would work pretty well. And so there's a lot of space for just, applications in conservation that are, take this thing that has been developed for an application in conservation instead of using a very large model developed by a big tech company.
Great, thank you. Okay, Alex.
Yeah, very much.
Go ahead.
Should I?
You can respond, and I'm also curious about we keep mentioning environmental, water, energy impacts of AI. I'm curious about what are they and what can we do about it? So, if you want to tackle that.
The question, what can we do about it? I think it's important to develop an understanding of the this AI ecosystem that is emerging and becoming like ubiquitous in our lives, and this understanding means being aware of things that have already been mentioned, like what are the electricity demands, and therefore like impact on global warming because of the production of electricity, of energy, water use, etc. And this is very complex questions. Actually, one of the conclusions of the work that has been developing around this area of trying to quantify or measure this impact is that it's actually very hard to quantify these impacts. We are starting to get better and better estimates. It's never exact calculations, but estimates of water use, energy demands. And what we see, and I've seen a little bit of this in my own work. It's not that it's not the main focus of my work to study the impacts of AI, but I've done some contributions to this. And what I have learned is that there's huge variations in these impacts. Like Melisande was saying, they are very small models that already work very well for the things they are designed for. And probably both of us can say that, yeah, in our own applications and our own research, our models are pretty small. They train pretty fast, depending on the task. And it's nothing compared to, say, ChatGPT or these kind of models. These are models like this ChatGPT. These are models that are, one, trained for weeks on many computers. So that, first of all, just training that, just developing the models requires a lot of electricity, a lot of water to cool down the servers, etc., etc. A lot of impact only in the development part. And for comparison, I'm saying weeks, sometimes months in many computers. For comparison, like the kind of models I train these days for the kind of things I was mentioning before, like material discovery and drug discovery, they train a few hours in a small computer, like in a laptop. So I think it's important to make this distinction. And then the other big distinction, or the other big important point that we have to be aware is the impact of large-scale deployment of these models like ChatGPT that a lot of people start to use every day for everything. And kind of long intro to answer your question, what can we do? Well, one thing we can do is learn about this and really think of whether we need to incorporate this AI into every corner of our lives. I invite everybody to reflect upon this question, because the answer might be different for each of us. But we're heading to a world in which, instead of doing like an internet search of how can I go from Mila to Concordia, then we ask ChatGPT. And there's already studies that quantify the difference between energy demand of regular search with a ChatGPT generation that has to call a server and do like the generation of a large language model. It's like at least 10 times more. And do we need that? Well, do we need AI to write our text? So I think it's important to ask ourselves this question. But beyond that, questioning the system that has taken us here. And that would be like a long answer. So I'll stop it here.
That's a perfect, I think, transition to Ceyda's work, sort of questioning the system that got us here. When we think about this, the systems are still created with these deep structural blindnesses or biases. So in your work, how do you see us overcoming the sort of challenge across the people that are developing on one hand, or the social scientists, or people with like indigenous knowledge systems, researchers like us? How do we align those visions and priorities?
Yeah, I mean, the bias question, first of all, I guess is kind of thorny, and I'm sitting with AI scientists, so they would answer this better probably, but so AI systems kind of accelerate the systems in which they get integrated into, right? So if there is bias within our social structures, those will be overblown once we, put AI in our social networking systems or things like that. So AI both kind of causes bias, but also exacerbates existing biases. And we see, obviously we see this having bad reflections on, like, you know, credit scoring algorithms or crime prediction systems, or, you know, insurance companies are now using these, embassies have been using these, I mean, governments are using these for their border politics. But also I feel like bias is maybe not, well, there's the argument that bias is not a bug, but a feature of these systems. You need to have a preset to, I guess, you know, build some kind of system on top of it. And yeah, like I said, they learn from vast data sets that are themselves products. Like, these data sets are products of human choices, historical contexts, and they're trained on data that reflect the prejudices of the people as well. So I feel like maybe we can be, or if it's possible, to be more intentional with what kinds of biases we're introducing to our systems, or also being cognizant of the fact that the data that we're going to create, that we're going to curate, is always going to have some kind of bias. So being aware of that and staying vigilant, I guess, yeah, I mean, these systems are always already cultural systems, right? We think of AI, we think of machines or computational systems, and we think of these like paradigms of objectivity, which is what's been passed down to us, this kind of thinking. But they're not, you know, paradigms of neutrality. Artifacts do have politics. They're always going to be culture systems. So to us, for abundant intelligences, the question is whose culture gets to be embedded into these systems, and if the users can, well, develop their own models with their own biases, maybe, or maybe being intentional with our biases. Like I said, maybe environmental sustainability can be a bias of the system if we're making decisions. Yeah, and how do we put all these people together onto the table? All these like various stakeholders. There's designers, there's community, there's researchers that want to do differently, that want to do things differently. And I mean, I'm a sociologist, so I'll be biased in this. To me, we need deeper socialization amongst all these social groups. You know, these divisions of labor that's been imposed onto us kind of by the nature of the technologies and technology production. A framework that we're all kind of experiencing under capitalistic, colonialist kind of structure. Yeah, there should be more opportunity for the designers to commune with the users or the communities that they're designing for. We should be more aware of, you know, I mean, this goes all the way down to the data. How is data produced? How is data made? So I think, you know, notions like co-production, co-design, participatory design, these are all very well, I think, good frameworks to think with and to do with. But also maybe even take it a step further, and we can ask who leads the production really. So maybe co-production, but also maybe community-driven production. What can that look like? When community steers a project's decisions, maybe that can be also a way to topple that kind of division that's enforced onto us. And for abundant intelligences, it's important to build those protocols that are organize that space between the designer and the community, really, or within the AI design process itself. What kind of protocols we can have in welcoming a new project, or in engaging on a new phase of a project. Maybe protocols really help people to slow down and be more reflexive and intentional while walking into any kind of practice. So I think that's very kind of important in, again, reducing that gap between the people, I think. And another thing that I couldn't get to while I was talking earlier is this protocol conversation. But also deeper than that is maintaining a relational perspective and attitude, I think, and relational at multiple levels. So like I said, AI is not a technology that's devoid of everything. It has various axes of influence, like on labor, environment, culture, and politics. So there is relations between humans in the design process within this relationality, but also between humans and non-humans. So the infrastructures and that support and enable these artifacts, and the humans that are in interaction with these I mean, this includes minors in Congo, but it also includes person who is typing down stuff. And also the relationship between the non-humans, so the data points and the models and their relationship to the lands and water. So there's, I think, like multiple scales of relationality here. And to an AI scientist, sometimes it can be probably that, you know, data is something that's just appearing in their screens and that's like devoid of any kind of relationality. It's just numbers that you're there to manipulate and operate on. And data doesn't have lives for them necessarily. And maybe that's why also for them, like more data better. And is that really the case? We don't know. But I mean, the more we get into this data question, the more also it becomes important, especially working in the context of indigenous AI, the question of data sovereignty also, I think, is something to consider. And yeah, I mean, indigenous people are very experienced in this, right? Because they have suffered centuries of exploitation and extractionist practices by academic disciplines. And so for them, it's very important to keep their data, and they know what that actually means when people take away their data. But I think this question is not just about indigenous people. It's really about all of us who go on internet and type anything anywhere, really, because we are all robbed off of our data as well. So yeah, I guess this is like a cultural question. Can we change the culture of AI? Not just the tool, but to change the tool, we need to change the design process and the production process. So yeah, earlier when we were talking with Alex, I was saying, yeah, we need to infest those spaces where like there's like purity going on, because it's probably not that pure anyways.
Yeah, take it like a virus and infest. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, Martin. I mean, given the power that's already held by big tech, given the like accelerating and rapid pace of development, AI and these systems, is it realistic, or how can we realistically imagine an alternative future where there's sort of a post-growth, or like what does it look like? How do we imagine it, and what does it look like?
Well, ultimately, I think we have no choice but imagining it. I think we're in a bit of this crisis of we have to pluralize also the way the projections of the future, right? There's a sort of like hegemonic take on what the future looks like. And very often, whether that's like industry reports, institutional reports, even science fiction to some extent, it's very often a very highly connected future, right? And I think there's work to do there to pluralize those futures and try to anticipate different types of possible futures and try to reflect on what they might teach us. But ultimately, in a more sort of like a closer, like a more grounded response, I think we have to, obviously we have to recognize that like big tech is very dominant, and now more than ever, it's very closely tied to regimes and to like and to states, and you know, it's accumulated a lot of power and a lot of wealth. I don't think we should look at this transition as like a revolution where we're all going to collectively say we're going to boycott big tech and it's going to collapse and we're going to, you know, only use digital commons. Like obviously, I don't think that's going to happen. But what we see in transition studies is that it's not so much of a shift from A to B, but it's a long process, right? We have to talk about the process of emergence. There's already today, and it's been happening for a while. Like there's already a lot of practices that are not big tech related, even though big tech is so dominant. It's not the case for all digital activities, right? Like when you take ChatGPT and Wikipedia, there are two digital software, not software, but interfaces or platforms or uses, yet they have nothing in common in terms of like the vision of the world they have, the governance that they have, the sort of business model and the value systems that they have. And so ultimately, I think we have to recognize that those practices are already happening. And Wikipedia is a big one of digital commons, but there's also a lot of different practices around the world, right? And it pays, I think, to look it pays to pay attention to, but we have to look into the margins usually, right? That's where changes happen. So you look at the people that are already currently suffering from this type of hegemonic AI or tech, And they're already thinking of alternatives, right? Because it's very obvious to them that it doesn't work. We can think about racialized people. We can think about, I'm sure, indigenous people, or even people that don't have access to it and have to invent like different ways of engaging with tech in the forms of low tech, frugal innovation in the global south. Like there's a lot of those things happening. And some of those projects are political in the sense that they try to portray a different vision of the world. We can think of the obviously digital commons or open data community, or more recently perma computing community, slow tech, low tech, and all that. But for a lot of other populations, it's more out of necessity, right? Out of sometimes survival, right? So anyway, so I think it's important to recognize that those practices are already happening, and it's more of a matter of engaging with them, supporting them, sometimes helping them mature. And I don't think the goal is to replace big tech by another type of alternative tech. I think there's a lot to say, and Ceyda, you were speaking a bit on that, and I agree very much on like a more decentralized approach. So, we're not looking, I think it's a mistake to right now with the tariffs to think of, oh, how can we have a Canadian big tech, right? Like ultimately, I think a lot of the unsustainability also comes from the fact that it's been so centralized. And through this centralization, we've shared this Eurocentric view of we have to have one digital layer for everyone, and it has our value system, which is superior to any type of value systems in the world. And we all have to use the same softwares and doing so by force. So I think moving towards a more sustainable way of engaging with technology is also embracing a much more pluriversal way of engaging with them. There's the cosmo-localism movement that says design globally and manufacture locally. And I think it's an interesting cosmo-localism, yeah. And I think it's an interesting way to look at it. Obviously, like there's a lot of things that we can share internationally, but if we want to go back to, or not go back to, but if we want to create more sustainable ways of engaging with this technology, they have to be situated, they have to be contextualized. Also from a purely environmental sustainability perspective, they have to be thought in reflection to access to resources, to the things that we have in our individual context. So ultimately, it's a very long response, sorry, but ultimately, I think imagining those futures in a plural way is a way forward. And also, there's a lot of things that are hard to anticipate, shocks of different types, tariffs now, obviously, the pandemic. That are more or less hard to anticipate, but anyway, and those shocks usually create shifts in the discussion, right? Like digital sovereignty wasn't so much of a topic in Canada until recently, where now we're all of a sudden figuring out that, oh my gosh, like, big US companies have all our data, we don't really have a cloud, or, like all those questions. So I think there are political parties or economic actors that are very good at seizing those moments to shift the discussion. And I think we have to be equally or better prepared to, when the time comes, when there's those shifts, to be able to say, well, let's not recreate a Canadian big tech, but, let's focus on the digital commons that we have in Quebec or in Canada, and how can we connect those networks to make digital technologies that respond to the needs of the people here, and that are in a way that is more convivial and more sustainable.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to get to questions from the audience in a moment, but just before we do, I want to leave it a little bit of open space for you to discuss amongst yourselves, and particularly for the machine learning sort of scientists. I know you guys are engaged, you're here with us, but this idea of what Ceyda and Martin are talking about, sort of bringing a co-creation approach, thinking about the people behind the data, are you hearing more of that in your circles? Is it happening?
Yeah, so I actually want to respond to things that Ceyda and Martin mentioned. Yeah, from the perspective of having worked on applications for biodiversity with ecologists, and yeah, that's often this, and I think I really want to come back to what you said, Ceyda, about like how if we can shift the values that we have in the AI culture of how, well, particularly, we value certain things and like how, data is collected and so on, because yes, most of the time, it kind of feels like data falls on our lap. In my work, I've been lucky enough to actually take part in some field campaigns to collect data in Quebec and in Panama. And then I think it's very important for machine learning researchers to realize how important local knowledge and engaging with local communities is. Because when we talk about, things that might seem as simple as, okay, labeling vegetation in an image, it's not a given that you're able to identify every species. And so if you come from the perspective of acknowledging that, the person who is labeling is not a data labeler, but a knowledge holder, then it shifts this perspective of how you engage with the people who help you in this data collection and how you engage with the data as well. And, I think this kind of pyramid of valuation in AI of like the more tech the task involves, like the higher on the pyramid you are. Because like people who label data, like, I don't know, you have to walk in the plantation or like in a field, and then I think people think it's very repetitive and therefore it doesn't require any knowledge, but that's like really not true. So yeah, there is still an effort to be made, but I think there are some places where this is recognized. So I'm the biologist I'm working with, works a lot in the Northwest territories, and yeah, he doesn't, on the contract, it doesn't say data labeler, it says knowledge holder. And I think it's not just symbolic, it also shows like how you value this work.
Right. Alex, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I would only add to this question that these ideas of co-creation and co-design and the ethical aspects of AI are indeed like permeating our field. It's really too slow. It's unfortunate. I don't have the solution of how we can accelerate this. Yeah, we need to get infested the virus. So it is happening, but the problem is that this field, and in general a lot of technology, is plagued with like this techno solutionist, techno optimist vibe, no? Of yeah, let's save the world and do cool things, and it's the opposite. We don't save the world. We just make it worse. It's a shame, but I am myself optimist in the sense that I think by holding these kind of events and having conversations about all this, we can we can get more people involved. Me and I think Melisande as well, in our own bubble, we do find other people who are starting to think, actually people who have been thinking of these questions for a long time. But I have to recognize that the vast majority is on the the pure let's do tech and push technology forward, and without much thinking of the other question.
Well, the fact that you're here is also, opening those horizons, and you can take that conversation back to yours as well. Okay, I think I'm going to turn it to audience questions, but I do want to give Martin and Ceyda a chance if you want to respond to anything else here.
I think maybe one thing I can say towards, I mean, you guys talked about what you can do, and then maybe there's a question of what we can do. And I'm really all for embracing technology, honestly. I'm so not giving into this like fear of tech that's been also pumped into our veins by the elite, really. Like it's not, I don't think it's like coming from genuine places necessarily. Yeah, I think we should, we should embrace the technology and not be afraid of, where it can lead or what can happen. I think we should be ready to get our hands dirty and messy, because we're already living in this unethical land of, like we're already washed in blood sometimes. So I think being cognizant of that is kind of important. And yeah, we shouldn't individualize like the problems with tech or like the things that we're seeing that we want to engage. I think there are ways, I mean, especially considering like sustainability, there's so many like local environmental movements that mobilize against like data centers, co-development strategies that are being employed, even like increasingly more by civil society, nonprofits, even local communities are coming up with their own kind of sustainable computational internet solutions, intranet solutions. So I think there's always, like you said, there is in this pluverse of actors, there is a lot of good work that's being done. So I think, yeah, we should make space more for that conversation and not just be paralyzed under the fear of big tech, because that's not the only game in town.
Right. Martha, last word to you.
Just a quick addition. I think this is great. Like this type of conversation is very much needed, and like more broadly speaking within academia and research, just how we are tied to, you know, like funding branches, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it makes us very isolated into disciplines, and interdisciplinary research is not greatly funded. But from my understanding, obviously I don't have a computing background, but from my understanding, as soon as you're within the computing field and you get like a grant, like an answer grade, so it's really hard to like deviate from that and to deviate from optimization strategies. And we're seeing new, like recent-ish communities within computing, such as the computing within limits community or the tech otherwise community, that are sort of like calling for critical friends, you know, calling people from different disciplines to try to like think of those issues that are in the intersection of tech and society ultimately, right? And so I think it's a great sign, but it's still a sort of like a weak signal. And I think there's this space is wonderful, and I think there's a lot to do and to try to like multiply those spaces where we can interact within disciplines.
Great. Okay, we'll turn into audience questions, but Martha, you have the clicker. I had also asked our panelists, you can just click it forward, to provide some resources, some takeaways. So for you at home or for you here in the audience, to take a photo. Some amazing resources. Martin has suggested Tech Won't Save Us, which is a great podcast, and it's sort of, to what you were saying, the sort of the opposite of like the technoverse, and it's not the silver bullet. Save the AI campaign, which is a bit of a satire website, and it kind of tells you about the energy, you know, or water uses of ChatGPT. Check it out; it's really great. Mélisande has suggested a Slack channel, AI for Conservation, and it's like over 2,500 researchers. You can join it. You can look for collaborators there. We've got Climate Change AI, which is a great nonprofit, and it's a bunch of really brilliant machine learning scientists who are working towards using AI for good. And This Climate Does Not Exist, which I think, Alex, you want to just tell us about it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I shared it because both Melissa and I worked on that together long time ago, right? You said like 5 years ago. Yeah, essentially it's we can check for yourself, but it's a website that allows you to visualize impact of climate change, like floods on streets that you choose. So you can go and enter your address, and yeah, it uses a now pretty old model, but it was a lot of work to develop that, and it generates visualizations of a flood at your own backyard, like we say. The idea is to trigger a bit of this empathy with the people who are already suffering these kind of consequences, and kind of to trigger this thought of, okay, this is what it would be like in my own home.
Yeah. It's a great way to raise, I think, just awareness.
To raise awareness.
Yeah. So these are some resources to take home. And I think we'll turn it over to audience questions now.
I'll just mention also, Andrea, for those of you joining us on Zoom, if you have any questions, you could pop them into the chat. We just put the chat up on our big screen also, because I know there's some comments in there. Thank you, Nilafar, so that people can see those here. Also, there's some more. Yeah, so put your questions in the chat, and those of you here in the space, just raise your hand. I'll bring a microphone over. Oh, got one here.
Yeah, thanks a lot, first of all. You discussed this centralization of like data hubs and like digitalization and the need for decentralized or contextualization of that? Like, so I was wondering who leads that process? Like, should be the states, governments, or private sectors, and how can we incentivize that in general? Yeah, that's all my question.
Like I think ultimately everyone, but who's the lead? I think well, I'm a big believer in commons and not only relying on public actors and private actors. I think there's a lot that can be done in different ways without necessarily relying on the state and relying on commodification of our data. So yeah, I mean, it's a hard question in terms of who leads this, but there's a lot of initiatives that are happening, and I think in many ways what we've seen, so for example, in Europe, there's a lot of like digital commons that are sort of reaching tipping points where a lot more people are using them, which makes it a more attractive community. And then there's some like state support, right? So there's some legitimacy given to those technologies. So for example, in France, or in actually, I think it's the European Commission. The European Commission has started using more the Fediverse, which is a network of decentralized different softwares that are sort of like alternatives to big tech. So there's an alternative to YouTube called PeerTube. There's an alternative to Google Doc anyway. And the European Commission has created an account and started using those. The French government, I believe, has now an interface where they can redirect you to like decentralized solutions or softwares if you're looking for alternatives. So there's definitely like those networks can be built with different types of actors. And I think everyone has a different role, whether that's creating and sustaining those activities, giving legitimacy, providing support in some cases. And I think there's a space for private actors as well, right? But yeah, currently I feel like it's very different in terms of like who's taking the lead. There's also municipalities sometimes, like Barcelona is one of the common examples where a lot of stuff are happening locally, where they develop their own platform as opposition to Airbnb, and they're very big into digital commons and stuff. I feel like the examples vary in terms of like who's taking the lead. Which is great, I think.
Any other questions? Could be a comment.
I think someone before said that the elites want people to have a fear of tech. What do they have to gain out of that, or why would they do that?
Yes, this is my big conspiracy theory. I think what they would gain is a public that is less in the know of the inner workings of the systems that we're living with. And so it would be easier to black box, where we already live with black box technologies, but it would be even easier for them to just push down their technologies onto us. I mean, I know still the public is having a hard time kind of reaching or raising their voice to be heard by the big tech, but there is big pushback. There's still conversations happening. There's still stuff going on. And yeah, what they would gain from that is avoiding those questions and just pushing what they want onto us. And if people don't make their own tech, they will need tech. And so they will be providing that too, right? So there's this whole, I think, economic discursive kind of political nexus that this fear thing is inhabiting.
There was another question.
Thanks. Oops. I guess it's an open question for all of you. So, and it's about the black box thing. So one of the issues for non-AI experts and dealing with AI and so on is that they don't really understand what gets in and what comes out from an algorithm. So I guess I'm curious, in your line of work, some of you have mentioned how can people be engaged in processes of data collection, or how to use, like, I guess, use sustainably in terms of energy or water consumption, use AI and so on. But I'm wondering if in your line of work, do you have some examples where people are critically engaging with AI in terms of training or what comes out from the algorithms? Like, and what happens with, do you have some examples, like cases where people are engaging with AI in those instances that involve using AI, if that makes sense?
I'll just go ahead very fast, just because I'm close to the microphone. Yeah, I mean, one example that I have about how can we make data differently, or how can we make AI differently, I guess is how I'm taking your question in a way, is an example from Maori in New Zealand. And there's this media company called Tehiku Media, and they produce a Maori speech synthesis app. And the way they did that, they came up with their database, or like their the whole process of data curation, really. They organized it around the festivals that their tribes would have, intertribal festival moments, and they would launch these. They still do. They launch these big competitions for recording sounds, like the words, like the Maori words and whatever. So, you know, and people who do the best pronunciation and I don't know, like input so many, you know, data points, then they get some kind of prize. And that kind of both feeds off of intertribal like the competition, but also people get a very felt sense of what data goes into these apps that is going to be very significant for their cultural, you know, preservation, revitalization, etc. So yeah, to me, that's kind of a genuine way to build like ethicalness into the system. When you are able to establish that relationship between data and people, like they also become kind of, maybe they feel accountable, or they feel more related to the model. So, you know, like they were telling us, you know, like the auntie is calling us in the middle of the night saying, oh, that word that we recorded, maybe that wasn't correct or something. And then when the speech app comes up, they're like, oh, we know, like, you know, this is our app, we made this. So there is like a real, like, kind of intimate relationship that's established from the get-go, from those like data curation processes, that I think is a very striking example of how things can be done differently.
Very quickly, I would say that one way to critically engage with AI is always refusal to engage, like not engage. And I think that's becoming a bigger trend in both inside AI and outside, and it's available as well to users.
Yeah, I'm going to have a different perspective from Alex. Which is that we still need more of them, but there are programs which like sit at this intersection of like AI and something else. And yeah, so in my PhD, a large part of my time is spent teaching to like different communities, which are not like AI people. So earlier this year, I was teaching for this wonderful program that is called Computer Vision for Ecology. And it's still very much in the academic realm, but basically ecologists like come with their data, and then we have like this boot camp for 3 weeks where they learn like how to code and like how to train a model, and like it really empowers them to understand, you know, what goes on in a machine learning model. And at the end, you know, if they train like a species classifier, let's say, they might, you know, they don't end the school like being machine learning scientists, like knowing everything, but at least like they understand, okay, if I ever, you know, use machine learning, I can understand when it's actually useful, what are the biases that go into my model, like where are the flaws. And I think like that's so important to have. And Mila has this Indigenous Pathfinders in AI program where they invite Indigenous like youth to come and learn AI for 2 months at Mila. And yeah, it's like those kinds of programs, I think we need more of them, but it would be also great to have more machine learning researchers actually engage in those.
Right. And that's our 10 minutes over. Any questions from the Zoom?
I'm not seeing any questions. It's your last chance. No.
Okay, then I'm gonna thank you, Martin. Thank you, Ceyda. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Mélisande. Thank you, Fourth Space. Thank you. And we'll close it there. Please do stay with us. I think we have a few posters that are going to come up on the screens, and there's some coffee and some refreshments. Please stay with us, and I think our panelists are here for a little bit longer to continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. Thank you all for coming in and the questions, of course. Just a note for you on Zoom, we're going to close up the Zoom and the live stream, switch over into poster mode. But thank you for joining us. Conversation remains available on our YouTube channel, and have a great afternoon.